Hello, and welcome to Nostalgia Marcana. I'm your host, Doug Leaf. Each episode of this podcast, we'll look back on the movies, TV, games, people, and phenomena that we still love talking about all these years later, and ask ourselves why these bits of pop culture still enchant us today. This week, we'll be revisiting...
Released in 1895, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine was a seminal work in science fiction, and it birthed an entire genre of time-traveling stories. And today we're covering a very special time-traveling story that was released exactly 100 years later in 1995. That is Chrono Trigger for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. One of the pinnacles of the Japanese role-playing game genre, and a game that frequently appears on the list of the top 100 games and usually is somewhere in the top 5th or higher of those rankings. I am very excited to be talking about this one today because the game is a blast, as we'll get into. And to help me do that is a games podcaster in his own right. Please welcome to the show the host of the Fun and Games podcast, Matt Storm, a.k.a. Matt Stormageddon.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you on here, and I asked you, what you might be nostalgic for and what you wanted to pick, and Chrono Trigger apparently was number one with a bullet. So tell me why.
So Chrono Trigger is responsible for me liking JRPGs effectively, or to frame it better, because JRPG is a contested term, turn-based RPGs, Super Nintendo RPGs. I hadn't played a lot of RPGs before it, and I hadn't really heard of it. I was a Sega Genesis kid, so I didn't own a Super Nintendo until much later, probably around the time Donkey Kong Country came out, so towards the back half of its life cycle. And so I was hanging out with my friend Roy at his grandmother's house, and we're sitting in his living room, we're having lunch, and he goes, I know you like anime and you like Dragon Ball Z. Have you played this game Chrono Trigger? All of the art is drawn by Akira Toriyama, who did Dragon Ball Z. And I was like, no, I've never heard of it. What is it? And he's like, okay, here, you have a Super Nintendo, right? And I did. And I was like, yeah. He's like, good, you're taking this home, and you can't bring it back to me until you've beaten it. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I went home and I played it, and the rest is history. I fell in love with the game. I played it through multiple times, game famously known for multiple endings, and I think one of the earliest incarnations of New Game Plus, which is a feature where when you beat the game, you can play it all again and keep your stats, your levels, some of your gear, your abilities. And it's been an obsession. I used to play it yearly until I got more towards the game's journalism side of stuff, and now I have no time to play anything. And yet I'm playing everything. But it is one of those things that I've returned to over and over again because of its story, its graphics, its sound design, one of the best soundtracks in video game history, and I stand by that. And and I've carried it with me. I don't know how old I was at this time. Some nebulous age between like 10 and 15. I can't really remember. I could probably do the math. But I'm also getting old, and so memory isn't what it used to be. But it's something that I've kept close to me, and literally anyone who knows me, they either know that I love Mass Effect or that I love Chrono Trigger. Although I love very many other things, those are the two things I've often talked about the most. And this is my favorite game of all time, number one above everything else.
Well, you're certainly in good company, because a lot of people cite this as one of the greatest games ever made, as I mentioned, and with good reason. My dirty secret is I've never actually finished the game. I didn't own it. I did have a Super Nintendo. I played and loved Final Fantasy VI to death, which is probably the other game that's talked about in the same breath as this one. And you can go listen to our Final Fantasy VI episode to hear me, talk sugar about that. I think Final Fantasy VI is incredible. I think Chrono Trigger is incredible, and debating which one of them is better is kind of a fool's errand. But I didn't finish it. I don't know why. I didn't own it. And I don't know why I didn't buy it, because it obviously, being a huge fan of Final Fantasy VI, I should have snatched it right up. And I just didn't, for whatever reason. And I didn't get back to it until later in life, when I I was able to emulate it on a PC, download a ROM and do that. The problem was that the ROM I downloaded, or no matter how many times I tried to download it, I would encounter this game-breaking error where you would get to a spot and there was a door you had to open to progress in the game, and the door would just not open no matter what you did. So that ended that playthrough every time. And I kept trying. I tried a couple of times too, going like, maybe this time will be the charm. Nope. Turns out software is going to be the same every time you run it. So never got anywhere until it came out for you could get it on your iPhone. And I started playing it there, and I got much farther than I had ever gotten before. And I think all the way up to the Zeal section is about where I got. And I just I was busy with other things, and I kind of petered out on it. But my inability to finish this game should not be construed as any kind of criticism of it, because it's a classic. It's a stone cold classic. I see there's a bunch of figures behind you. Are any of them Chrono Trigger figures?
So no, actually, but I do have above me, I don't know if you can see it from your angle, but I have an original copy of Chrono Trigger for the Super Nintendo in box with the manual. And then I also have a imported from Japan copy of the 3 or 4 disc Chrono Trigger soundtrack with a handwritten list of all the tracks, because the person I bought it from on eBay didn't have the original track listing, so they literally printed one out for me. And then I do, down below where my DS games are, have a copy of the DS version as well. Don't own the PlayStation copy. It's the only copy I don't still have, but I used to. But yeah, I don't have a lot of Chrono Trigger memorabilia, because there isn't a lot of it for a game that is as popular as it's been. It just didn't get the same kind of merchandising that a lot of other Square at the time, and now Square Enix games do. I'm hoping with this Chrono Cross re-release, which is a whole other can of worms as far as whether I like it or not, but I'm hoping with the how well, if that sold well on the Switch and the other places it was re-released, that maybe we'll get a port of Chrono Trigger or a remake or some kind of re-release.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Chrono Cross is the semi-sequel to it. It's pretty different from this game, and we won't need to get into detail on that. I thought maybe a good place to start here was sort of talking a little bit about what this game is, how it plays, because we have a lot of listeners who may not be gamers and might go like, why should I bother listening to this episode? I don't know this. Maybe this would be a good time to kind of sell them on what this actually is, because if your only experience with games is run to the right and shoot and jump, this plays very differently.
Yeah, so it's a turn-based RPG, like a lot of the games that were out at the time that were made by Square. That means that the combat, while active, when you're fighting, you choose from a menu and you attack each other. The narrative hook of this game is that you're attending the Millennial Fair to go see a friend of yours who's an inventor, and you meet a young girl who, of course, it's a boy meets girl kind of story. You hang out, and then you go to see the demonstration. Girl gets teleported somewhere by this device by accident because of her amulet, and so you volunteer to go after her while your genius friend figures out a way to find you, and then like time traveling shenanigans ensue as you end up getting sent back to the past, and like you meet the kingdom of that past, you meet different characters. It's really a very broad story. Like, I feel like the SNES is when stories really took off on the Nintendo. Like, there were some cool stories on the NES, but it was like Super Nintendo was where storytelling, I feel like, really, really took off. And from a gameplay perspective, if you've played any other turn-based RPG, either by Square or by the myriad of other companies that have made turn-based RPGs, or you've played more modern ones like Octopath Traveler, which is also Square Enix, you'll be familiar with this game's gameplay. It's not terribly different from a lot of, all turn-based RPGs have other kinds of additional mechanics, but the base game is a very similar kind of turn-based combat. The big thing about this game that made it stand out from other RPGs at the time is the different characters at a certain level would get double and triple techs, which were like magic or special attacks that you could do together in unison, and depending on the combination of characters you had in your party, and you get a pretty large variety of characters, you could learn different cool moves that were elemental based or action based or could heal. And yeah.
So for people who haven't played a game like this, again, Matt mentioned it's turn based, which means it plays out more like a board game than something where your reflexes matter. And so you select from a menu when it's your turn, what do you want to do? You want to do something offensive, something defensive. And then the game will, under the hood, do some mathematical calculations to confirm if you did it and how effective it was, based on your statistics and the statistics of your opponents. And you go back and forth taking turns, and you're the kind of the challenge of the game is managing your resources and managing the timing, so that so the classic example would be, let's say you're up against a bunch of enemies, and one of them is a big dumb ogre that hits real hard, and the other one is like a wizard that keeps healing the ogre. Strategically, you figure out, okay, I got to use my turns to kill the healer, so that will stop this infinite loop of the ogre never getting worn all the way down to zero. And so it goes. The innovation for Chrono Trigger is there's two things. One, you mentioned that tech thing, so you can have up to your party will have, I think, up to 8 or 10 people in it.
All told, I think it's somewhere around that number.
Yeah. So there's that many characters to choose from. You can only have 3 active ones in your party at a time, but the combinations of those characters will produce certain unique things you can do that are so a lot of the fun is figuring out, if I have this character and that character, that unlocks the ability to do something that maybe that character could not otherwise do. So that's really cool. The other thing it introduces is a form of spatial awareness, because these battles play out on the screen in real time. In a Final Fantasy game, your characters would be on one side of the screen, the enemies are on the other, and the spacing doesn't really matter. Here, like, you might do an attack that's like you make like a line of flame, and you can, depending on how you're positioned, you might be able to hit multiple enemies along that line, depending on where you are. So those two things add a lot more. They kind of spice up this sort of otherwise dry turn-based back and forth.
Yeah, and it's actually 7 characters.
Thank you.
And technically only 6 narratively. It depends. So things can happen that determine one of your party members is actually optional. You may not get them in your party, which is a fun thing about this game that I learned the hard way the first time I played through it.
Yeah, there's a lot of variety here. They kind of take what worked from Final Fantasy VI and Secret of Mana, like some of these other RPGs that were happening and being developed alongside this. And so, like Final Fantasy VI, for example, there's like 14 characters you can have in your party. 4 of them are mandatory by the end of the game, and you can mix and match, and you may not actually end up retrieving them all. But the ending is basically the same, right? It gets you to the same end point. This game introduced some branching to the story that makes choice matter a little more.
Yeah, it depends on when you beat the game.
Meaning when in the game's world's timeline.
And also the playtime of the game, because the final boss is a creature called Lavos you find out very early on in the story, and you can fight Lavos at multiple points within the chronology of the game, but also you can fight Lavos just at different points because there are secret ways to reach him as well as the narrative ways to reach him. And every time you reach him, if you kill him, the game ends. Also, there's canonically an ending where if you die to him at any point, you get also a different ending where the world ends. It's not that big of a spoiler. It's a game over screen, but it's still considered one of the canonical branching path endings. So that was really interesting. The fact that this game had a new Game Plus mode, as I said earlier, which allowed you to restart the game from the beginning, but with what you had already, it encouraged you to replay this game and get those different endings, because also there is a completely separate ending if you can beat the game in like a couple hours, which you can once you're powered up, and you get a completely different kind of unrelated ending than all the others. And I think in all the years I've played it, I've now seen all the endings, but I couldn't recite to you which ones there are. I believe there are 12 endings. I could be wrong. The DS version of the game, which is, if you can find it, the best version of the game, catalogs the endings for you, so you can actually see them. The DS copy is a port of the PlayStation version, which was an abysmal version of the game, because even though they added really cool animated cutscenes, the loading times on the PlayStation were so long that it was almost unbearable. The game would have to load each fight, and so it would lag every time you got into a fight. And so the DS version was a compressed version of that. And while the graphics didn't change much because it was on a cartridge, there were no load times. And so what was the best version of this game was made better by not also having those painful load times. And it's still the version I try and replay on my 3DS. Although now the Steam version is very playable. It was originally the same as the fine mobile port, but they as they were working on the Pixel remasters, they also updated the Chrono Trigger version on Steam to be more like the DS version. It's not identical, but like it's gotten a lot of quality of life upgrades to make it look less bad and sound less bad.
Put it on Switch. Put it on Switch already.
Yeah.
So I think this is probably a good time to talk about some of the things that make this special. We sort of talked about sort of how it just sort of works, and you mentioned the multiple endings, which we can get into more detail later about kind of how they play out. The time jumping thing also is very unique to this. I can't think of any other games of this era that involved a time spanning plot like this. So what ends up ultimately happening is you are shunted by the plot in the beginning from time period to time period, and eventually you will get this bitchin' time machine called the Epoch that will allow you to freely move between set like eras in time. So as you mentioned, it matters when you kill the end boss, Lavos. You can choose, do I want to face him down in 65 million BC? Do I want to do it in the 2,000 years in the future, right? And depending on which of these points along the timeline you choose, that affects how things play out. But eventually, of course, before you even get there, you'll be time hopping back and forth for various quests to do things in time. And I like that they kind of open up, even at the beginning of the game, they open up the idea of a grandfather paradox.
Yeah, and what's also cool is that the time jumping that you're talking about, there's certain side quests that literally to finish them, you leave someone in the past and then find them in the future. Like, you have a character named Robo in your party who's literally a robot. And at one point, to save an area, a wooded area in the past, you leave him there to work the soil and help. And then you jump to the future and find him covered in vines in the present day, what the present day was for you, and like wake him back up and then talk to him about all that time and like what he saw and what it was like for him, because it was a blink of the eye for you. And that kind of stuff is really powerful and interesting for a game that's so early on in the life cycle of video games, especially comparatively. There are time travel stories now, but I don't think any that have had some of the cleverness and impact that a game like this has had.
Yeah, I think a great example of this is something that happens very early on in the game. So you mentioned, it starts out, it's in the year 1000 AD, because I guess there's a Christ in this world, even though it's not Earth. I don't know what AD stands for on this planet where it takes place. But anyway, you go to a fair and you meet this girl, and as you said, there's a teleporter accident, and instead of being transported through space, she's transported through time, and you go after her. What you end up finding out is that she's a princess, and yes, she has been in disguise, and she goes 400 years back into the past where the queen has been kidnapped. Because she resembles her ancestor, the people at 400 years ago take her and they just assume she's the queen. They treat her like the queen, and then suddenly she winks out of existence as soon as you find her. And then your scientist friend explains the grandfather paradox, because everyone stopped looking for the real queen, she died, meaning she never had any descendants, thus eliminating, her name is Marl, from the timeline. And they explain that to you very succinctly with a bunch of sprites in a way that's like, yes, you just took this heavy quantum physics concept and made it, we've seen it in Back to the Future and stuff, but they made it very simple here for anybody.
Yeah, and then your first quest is with your best friend, Luca, to go find the actual queen and return her home so Marl will re-exist again. And like what's really interesting about how the narrative is threaded is the narrative very much starts as like a problem and we have to solve it. We have to find Marl and get back because she's a princess and we need to return her home or it's gonna be our heads. And like that one incident snowballs into all of these other things and the time traveling and like it's done. I don't want to spoil all of it because I would love folks to play it, but like it's done so smartly. There's also very early on in the game when you return with Marl, you're arrested for kidnapping her, and there are things you can do at the Millennial Fair that call into your character during your trial to prove whether you're guilty or innocent. Now, most of them don't matter because the narrative still goes a certain way, but like the actual hearing is affected by certain things you can do at the fair. And that also I'd never experienced in a game before, like where my choices mattered. Now that's so common in games. Mass Effect, one of my other favorite games of all time, is built on that. But like back then, I'd played Super Mario RPG and a few other things and like Metroid or whatever else, and like my actions, like you kill the thing, you do the thing, you kill the thing. This was so much more complex, and I was always fascinated by that it had callbacks like that, and like the different time channel shenanigans that affect other things. It really is kind of brilliantly constructed.
The game makes a great first impression because of that, because the time traveling sequence and the first one, this first dip into the past, and the grandfather paradox you have to undo is a great introduction. And then upon returning home, like you said, there's a trial, which is something that I had never experienced in a game setting. This was, what a great narrative swing to do something big and interesting. It kind of reminds me of the opera from Final Fantasy VI, where it's just like,
sure,
we're doing something, we're showing you something that you would not expect. You're not just wandering through a dilapidated dungeon and killing monsters in it. We're using this gameplay engine to do something different. And as you said, your choices at the fair come back to haunt you. Potentially, if you didn't help certain people, witnesses will be called at your trial to show what you did or did not do. And of course, when you went through that the first time, you had no idea of any of that stuff. You were just doing whatever you felt like doing at this fair. So to have all of that stuff come back was just such a great surprise. I don't mind spoiling the plot here. That's, hey, it's a 30-year-old game, and
it's true.
If nothing we've said so far has not encouraged you to try it, don't worry about it. And if it has, please go play this game because, like I said, it's a treat. But yeah, so the first thing that happens after that trial is it's corrupt. You get convicted no matter what happens.
Correct.
And sent to prison. So it's just a great, like I said, it's a great opening salvo for this story that then, as you said, becomes sort of this series of just dominoes falling of okay, we did this. Oh, now we're stuck in this time and we can't get back. Okay, now what are we going to do? And each kind of turn of the wheel, as you go through one of these epochs, things get worse and you learn that there's more you have to do. Like the problem is not limited to this time, right? Something bad is happening across time that you are now being asked to solve. Do you have a favorite character?
Yes, I do.
Who's that?
Magus is my favorite character.
Interesting. Okay. Maybe explain to the audience who Magus is.
So Magus is a character that you encounter very early on after you meet one of your first non-human party members, a frog knight named Frog, unless you know who he is, because you do get his backstory eventually. And every time I play, name him by his actual name, which makes some of the text very funny. But it's like naming Red 13 Nanaki in Final Fantasy VII.
Right.
Like, what? Nanaki's name is Nanaki? So you meet, this is in the medieval times, you meet Frog, and you talk to him, and it turns out he was turned into a frog. He used to be a human. Him and his best friend confronted this evil sorcerer named Magus, and his friend died, and he got turned into a frog. And so he's been cursed and been trying to get revenge. And Magus it seems, for the first third to almost half the game, like the big bad of the game. So he's a villain. He's got long blue hair. He's got a very Piccolo-like face, if you're familiar with Akira Toriyama's work. He's got a big scythe, and he's just this very cool, commanding presence. He's got one of the best boss themes probably in the history of video games. I defended it in a panel at PAX East this year as my example of why Chrono Trigger is the best video game soundtrack of all time. You can actually hear that panel over at Left Behind Game Club, and it was a blast. Oh, no, it wasn't. That was for a different podcast, and we don't actually have the audio, I don't think. But trust me, it was a great panel.
You had to be there.
And anyways, you had to be there. But, he's this kind of cool, collected villain. And to rush ahead a little bit, there is a circumstance where you can fight him and you can choose not to fight him, and he can join your party, and then he becomes one of your last party members. And he's one of my favorite characters. It was one of the first kind of anti-hero, kind of I'm working with you but reluctantly kind of party member stuff, which I'm a sucker for in other media. Venom is one of my favorite comic book characters, and so that paints a pretty clear picture for me. And yeah, he's really great. And what I love about his character is that you find out through the plot that he's not actually a villain. He actually, you think, so the way the narrative thread goes is, when we were alluding to Lavos, this creature that has fallen from the sky that destroys the world in the future, you think that Magus summoned him because when you arrive at his castle, you see the summoning circle and people like rumor that he's summoning this creature. When you confront Magus, it turns out he's summoning this creature to kill it because it destroyed his home in the future, and he's actually from the future and was thrown into the past. And the narrative continues to explain like who he was in the past future. Time travel, it gets weird.
Yeah.
But like he grew up in the past, but he was actually thrown from like the not too distant future into the past, and his whole life's goal was to kill Lavos, and you screwed it up, and then you travel with him to actually figure out what happened. And it's just the layers upon layers of storytelling with this one character, let alone all of the other characters in the game. They're not all perfect characters, you know, but I really do like all the characters in the game, and all of their backstories and narratives are really interesting, and the main plot weaves you through side quests. I think some of them are skippable. Most characters have like a quest to like show their past and explain like why they are who they are, almost like loyalty quests like you would do in later RPGs. And so Magus, because of how great his narrative was, the kind of badass character he was, and of course his look, just plainly because I like Dragon Ball Z, and Piccolo's also my favorite character. All of those things kind of came together for him becoming one of my favorite characters in video games, let alone in this game.
Yeah, I think mine emotionally was Frog.
Sure,
I like.
He's a pretty popular favorite.
He's fun. I mean, he's a frog.
Yes.
But I should say he's not. He's on two legs. You know, he's like semi-anthropomorphic frog.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, yeah, he. You know, they did a trick with him. They would later do in Final Fantasy VII, which is you think he's this legendary hero turned who's had this tragedy, and it turns out no, you were sort of the squire, like you were like the side dude who happened to survive, and is now on the path to glory or whatever you want to call it. But he's just sort of very funny. He's very prim and proper, but he looks like an adorable frog, and you kind of fall in love with him immediately.
Yeah, I love his storyline too, because the knight that he accompanies, Cyrus, was also his best friend, and like I didn't play a lot of survival horror games. Truthfully, I still don't. I'm a big coward, but like I like games that dabble in horror. And like I mentioned, all of these characters have different side quests, and one of Frog's major side quests to like get his final weapon and stuff is to avenge his friend Cyrus, who died. And the way you kind of get that quest or find out about it is you go to this crypt where his grave is, and there is a like bloated armor version of this hero that kind of can't talk and is like tries to attack you. And it turns out this is the kind of haunting spirit of his best friend who can't rest because of how he was killed. And you have to like resolve it, which is really interesting. Like I'd never seen anything like that. And when you first encounter him, he like can't talk. He's like kind of just raging and attacks you. He kind of is this like freakishly large sprite comparatively to other stuff. It's just really interesting. Like again, the storytelling was so complex here for a game that like I just didn't know at the time stories could do. And like, of course, many games there and beyond, like Metroid and Super Metroid and other things, have plenty of horror elements, but this was kind of one of the few moments in this game where I went, oh my god, he's a ghost, what the hell, like why is this here, what's going on, like kind of a thing, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, these games would dabble in this kind of horror stuff from time to time. Things like body horror and stuff. You'd be amazed what you can do with 16 bits and some good sprite work. Not just in Chrono Trigger, but a lot of stuff of this era. Since we're on that subject, we should talk about the gorgeous visuals of this game. I would put this up against anything, especially some of so we talked about that trial. It takes place in this like stained glass cathedral that is just like, you can't believe that someone managed to do this on the now very primitive hardware of the SNES.
Yeah, I mean, and even the later versions, the DS version, the PlayStation version, and the Steam version, well, except for the Steam mobile version, which did the pixel smoothing nonsense, which is terrible. But like the DS and PlayStation versions didn't really change the graphics at all. They used the extra power to insert anime cutscenes hand drawn by Akira Toriyama, but they didn't bother to actually like change the sprite work at all because it was already so gorgeous. And I will fight to the death that sprites are always going to be prettier than polygons. I love how far games have come, games like The Last of Us, and that look so realistic. But there's something about a good sprite artwork game that will always be my favorite. And like this has some of the best art direction in a video game. Like it's funny, I have the opposite story of you with Final Fantasy VI. I never played it when it came out. I finally started to play it on Steam, and then I lost my access to my save file right when the world ended.
Oof.
And so I had to start over, and which I didn't. And so I will eventually play the Pixel Remaster because I did like it. But it's funny because the gesture laugh that Kefka has, I first heard in this game and thought it was in this game first.
Oh.
But it's actually Kefka's laugh from 6. But like this to me is one of the most beautiful games of that time, even though of course 6 does a lot of the same stuff. The opening scene of 6 is one of the most gorgeous and stunning opening scenes of a video game with the mech walk. But like, I just think I agree. It's really impressive, the art direction and the creature design, the character design. The characters are so expressive. Their victory taunts, the way they act, they laugh. Like you can read their emotions on their face, which was unheard of at the time, right? You think about the original Mario, like there was no expression on Mario's face. He just had that kind of stoic, static face, and you would jump on Goombas. Like
poor flat affect Mario.
Right. But like getting to the Super Nintendo, like Square Enix or Squaresoft at the time was so good at making expressive sprites that you could like identify with and latch onto. You think about how even after this game, Super Mario RPG, with the kind of Mario turning into other characters to impersonate them to tell narrative, like this was kind of the beginning, this generation of games, of how to create expressive sprite work that would then go on to like revolutionize what Nintendo and other consoles did in the beyond.
It reminds me of we did talk about this on the FF6 episode we did here, which is it's that what you're alluding to is how they can wring a lot of emotions out of characters that have a fairly limited number of pixels and frames of animation. They somehow get across all of these emotional states for beats that, like, I mean, yeah, again, I know Final Fantasy VI better, so that's going to be my touchstone. But like, as we said, that game has like a suicide attempt, 2 genocides. Like, there's all kinds of just unbelievable tragedy in that game. And comedy, and they're able to get that across. And the same thing is true here. Like, and these sprites are actually a little more expressive than the ones from FF6. And there's something it's almost like puppetry. Like the way you could take a very simple puppet, look at the Muppets. Like their faces barely move, and yet like Fozzie Bear is a fully fleshed out character, right? He works. And there's something about like there's a less is more to this that is in some ways even more like a direct line to my heart than say, the fully rendered Joel and Ellie of The Last of Us.
Yeah. I mean, I think also there's a novelty to how expressive they are. And it's funny you bring up like how adult, like a lot of people like to say that Final Fantasy VII is the first time RPGs were really adult. And while I will agree that it is a very more adult forward presented game with more realistic looking graphics, especially in the CGI cutscenes, but like again, suicide attempts in 6 and like their world ending plots, the whole backstory, Luca's side quest, her mother's wheelchair bound in the beginning of the game and is sick, and you don't really know why, you just know she is, and like there's a whole separate like individualized time travel moment where you get to relive what happened and even save her, the accident that she had, and like this whole creepy backstory, like, and it's portrayed just kind of in this small moment where like either you go back in time and witness your mom's accident again, or you save her. Like things like that are just so much bigger, and it always made me laugh that folks were like, oh no, RPGs didn't get adult till PlayStation. It's not true at all. Both of these 2 Super Nintendo RPGs alone had such adult themes and like growth moments and like just really complex and impressive narratives.
Yeah, I'll co-sign that 100%. I also love how the narrative here, it's not just, most time travel stories don't involve this many points in time. This is like, this spans all eras. Like I said, you go as far back as 65 million years into the past and about, 2,300 years into the future or 1,300 years into the future from this where you start in 1000 AD, and a whole bunch of points in between. And there's something about that idea of like, time trotting instead of globe trotting that is even kind of special among time traveling stories. Like most time travel stories are pretty much, you probably have like someone comes back from the future, or that, and that's it, right? So there's something very like expansive and epic about the nature of this narrative. And it introduces a lot of just really neat ideas into time travel stories. Like, as I mentioned at the top, by this point we had 100 years of time travel stories. And I think there's really cool, neat, like just flourishes that kind of build on something like that. So for example, one of my favorite things in it is eventually you wind up at this space at the end of time.
Yeah.
And I just love that. It's such a simple thing. Like, it's meant to be like your hub where you kind of sit and regroup, like a kind of a peaceful place. But what it looks like sort of a little Victorian square, but like just a square. Like literally, like it's the size of a room with some lampposts and a couple of characters that I guess I don't know where they came from or why they exist, but sitting there at the end of time waiting to like work with you. But there's something very evocative. Like it's this place outside of time.
It's funny because you saying that proves that you've not beaten the game. So all of the characters, all of the characters that are at the end of time, you find out why they're there. They are all connected to APOC, the time machine you have, and different important points, of course, within the narrative. But what's also really funny and a little sad is like, because this is your hub, so how you get here is when you go back to the past and you meet Isla, your cave woman girlfriend, effectively. She's just a badass. You try to go back through the portal again with 4 people, and you end up there. And what happens is they explain is that because of the fabric of time, it's a MacGuffin, so you can only have 3 party members. But like because you're traveling through time, you can only travel with 3 people. So whoever you don't take with you to time travel stays at the end of time. So like if it's Robo the robot, he's a robot. He doesn't have to eat. He doesn't have to sleep. I feel less bad. But like, if you leave Marl behind or Frog who's so far from the past, like you're really absolutely just stranding people there until you can save the day and fix time. And like, that's wild to me. And how sad that must be for the people who have lives and families, but they can't go because you're leaving them behind to go on this adventure, right? Like, of course it's to save the world, but still, it's a little sad that you're leaving these people behind and they're stranded there until time is saved.
Yeah, and I like how, I mean, again, I never beat it, so I don't know all of the ins and outs, but the way you sort of start to learn, like, why is time full of holes? Right? Like, where is this all coming from? What is the source of this? And again, it's great writing because it feels all interconnected. That it's not just like, I don't know, because it'd be fun to travel through time. Like, no, they try and actually work through, detailed explanations of what is happening to unravel the fabric of time ever since this creature fell to Earth 65 million years ago.
Or whatever planet we assume is Earth, because I don't actually know if they say the name of the planet. Maybe it's Gaia. I don't know. A lot of planets in a lot of RPGs is called Gaia, so who knows? But yeah, I think that it's very easy to accept this story and go, yeah, of course, it's whatever. It's a Super Nintendo game. But if you really sit down and look at it, this and, again, 6, which were so close in release, so it's hard not to compare them, and shared a lot of like the same sound effects and creators and all of that, they are way more complex than even at the time a lot of other video games were. And even still since, I mean, there is a lot of cool stuff. I mean, a game I played for the first time last year, Live Alive, which is also created by Takashi Takada, who is one of the game directors on this game, like also has a really cool kind of time-spanning narrative, but it's not really a time travel story per se. That came out more recently for the first time in the States, so I don't want to spoil that one. But like, I like RPGs that aren't just like, here's the story, fall through the narrative. They're fine, but I like when there's complexity and like things aren't as they seem. And again, you're right. At that point we'd been getting time travel stories for about 100 years, but nothing like this. And I still think to this day, I mean, there have been probably books and movies that have gone as complex as this, but I really don't feel like any other time travel game has come close to what Chrono Trigger did in the way it did it.
We should talk about what the name even means. Because Chrono is your main character, but it just turns out that there's also a device in the game called the Chrono Trigger.
Yes.
You want to talk about what it is and what it does?
So the Chrono Trigger is actually an item. So the other thing that this game did uniquely, and again, we're headed for more spoilers. So again, if you really want to play this game, and these spoilers we've said so far haven't deterred you from playing it, but you don't want to spoil it further, go play the game and come back. This podcast lives in perpetuity until the internet fails as a construct. So you can come back whenever you want. But the Chrono Trigger, actually, now I remember, I just didn't remember that's what this was called, is an egg-shaped item. And the Chrono Trigger is important because when you confront Lavos, once you get to the time period where Magus is from, you lose. The party loses. And Chrono, to save his friends, sacrifices himself. Lavos goes for the killing blow. Chrono steps forward. Everything goes white. You wake up at the end of time. Everyone's there except Chrono, and you find out that he sacrificed himself to protect the party. So for the first time in an RPG like this, the main character's gone. And you can beat the game without ever finding the Chrono Trigger and defeat Lavos, and then Chrono's just gone. Or Gaspar, one of the people at the end of time, tells you that there's an item called the Chrono Trigger, which if you go find it, it will allow you to go to that exact point in time and something to substitute Chrono out of that moment in time. The Chrono Trigger will allow you to swap this substitute for Chrono and save him from that fate. But it's the only time you can ever do this, and you can only do this once. And so you use this item to save Chrono's life. And it's really, really kind of a fascinating, shift in the story, because you could choose not to save Chrono and just continue on in his honor and beat the game, defeat Lavos. Or you can do this, what's effectively a very long but important side quest. Get a doll from the Millennial Fair that happens to look like Chrono, conveniently. Bring that doll, swap it out in that moment in time using the Chrono Trigger, and then bring Chrono back with your party and save his life. And it's just, they're you have to go through these different steps to do it. It's not just as simple as get the item, save Chrono. But it's really interesting that they give you the option to save your friend who sacrificed himself, or you can just leave him dead.
Well, that's what we were sort of talking about before, right? These branching points in the narrative. And again, killing not just any character, but the main character. That's a big swing. That's a big narrative swing. It's no big spoiler for Final Fantasy VI, but none of your party members die at any point in the story, or can die. They would pull this trick again with great effect in Final Fantasy VII, but with no way to bring that character back, despite people spending a whole lot of time delving into the code trying to figure out if you could. Yeah. Do you have a favorite moment from Chrono Trigger?
There's so many. It's a narrative I know super well. It's funny, I couldn't remember what the hell this one item was, but I did remember all of these minute plot beats. I mean, there's so many. I really love the trial, because typical RPG things you would do, like pick up items, ignore side quests, whatever else, are things that can indict you in that trial. But if you avoid those tropes and or just help people and be kind and be patient, you actually can you can't win the trial, but they find you not guilty, but they put you in the cell overnight anyway, because they need the narrative to go forward, essentially. So I think the trial is definitely one of them. And then the reveal of who Magus really is. That Magus is actually a young boy from this new age, this in-between point between the present and the far future, and who has a sister who dies at the same time Lavos arrives, and you're thrown back, and he's thrown back in the past, and he grows up to be Magus, and you actually can confront this boy with Magus in your party. And one of the coolest little details in that moment, so the little boy's name is Janus, and his sister Sheila. Janus has a cat that follows him everywhere, and at some point with Magus at the head of your party, I think, or just in your party in general, if you go and talk to that cat in that time period, that cat will follow you around everywhere because it recognizes you as that same boy. And it's just little details like that, or even when you're at home as Chrono, if you talk to your own cat as Chrono, he will also follow you around the house. Like, little things like that make this game very special.
It makes it come alive. I thought of another moment that I really liked that just kind of stuck with me. And this is a horror moment. So you can, fairly, like I said, fairly early on in the game, you're being forced as to what time periods you're going to, and you are forced to go to 2300 AD.
Yeah.
Into the future, which is a nightmare future. Because in the normal course of events, where you have not intervened and stopped Lavos, it reveals itself in the game's 1999 and wrecks the whole world. So everything after that is this, kind of nuclear waste of a world. So you're going to these like futuristic domes, but they're all kind of busted up, and the people are barely getting by, and there's no food for anybody. And so how is anyone surviving without food? Well, they have these like pods that you can go into, and through technology, it revives you, right? It gives you back energy. But they talk about how this is not nourishing. Like, you'll never feel full. And there's something really horrifying about that idea of like these people that are just subsisting by popping themselves into this machine over and over again, but never actually feeling any better or feeling full. Like, that's just, I mean, they look, for sprites, for little 16-bit sprites, they look like they've gone through hell with living in this world. And that was always kind of like oh wow, that's a pretty Philip K. Dick idea for a 16-bit RPG.
Yeah. What's really fascinating about this game too, narratively, is like, I think about these favorite moments that we're talking about, but all of them are also peppered with really comical, goofy moments. And I think it's what makes the game stay together and not just feel like a drag. Like, minutes after you meet those people at those different domes, you then have to get across the map. And so you race a guy named Johnny, who is actually like a transforming racing motorcycle, and you have to race him in a space car. And it's just like, still a very serious people are dying narrative, but you're doing this goofy ass race. It's like, I love that this game tries not to take itself too seriously and is peppered with plenty of comedy, even though there are tons of heart-wrenching, very serious moments.
Yeah, Final Fantasy VI pulls that same trick as well. And we talked about it on that episode again. Like, I don't know how they lash all these different tones together in a way that doesn't destroy them all, but it actually makes them all stronger. It is a magic trick of those narratives. We have not yet really delved into the soundtrack.
No.
And man, is this a good one.
Oh my God, yeah. So it's I'm going to butcher these names. I'm bad with Japanese names. I apologize in advance, but it's Yasunori Mitsuda and Nobuo Uematsu, which, if you've played any Squaresoft or Square Enix game in the last, 30 years, you know both those names very well. And it's some of the best music in video game history, I think, for a lot of reasons. We'll talk about the dynamics of the story, and I think this is a very Star Wars situation where I always say that Star Wars is a great movie, but it would not be a great movie without John Williams' soundtrack. It would be a very boring, bland movie. That soundtrack makes that movie come alive, and that's why it's one of the great science fiction stories, right? It's got that incredible soundtrack to like elevate all of it. And this game is the same. This game would be perfectly fine and good probably without the music, but the music just elevates everything from the boss battle to the Millennial Fair theme to Gatto's theme to Magus's theme to like all of the moments, all of the places. I mean, you were talking about the far future before, 2300 AD, and like all of the music on the world map and in most of the areas is this somber kind of tone piece. And so not only do you feel sad from what you're looking at, but from what you're hearing as well. It also, considering what the limitations of the Super Nintendo sound chip were at the time, and a lot of games of this era had some incredible music. So I mentioned Super Metroid before, of course, Donkey Kong Country. David Wise did some of the best soundtrack music in the history of video games. Like, there were tons of great games, but I still feel like no soundtracks were quite as complex and as intricate as Chrono Trigger is. I feel like anyone listening to this right now, even if you've never played Chrono Trigger, this whole soundtrack is on Spotify. Go to Spotify and listen to it. Jump around through some tracks. I guarantee you'll feel something, even having no context for the game.
Yeah, and of course, I usually do, I've edited in bits of the soundtrack throughout this episode. So
Sure.
Matt, you haven't heard it, but it's there. Everyone else is
Yeah.
hearing it. But like, yeah, this is up there with the best soundtracks. And I've said this before, but games of this era, the 8 and 16-bit era, they obviously didn't have a lot in terms of the tech, to be able to make pieces that were usually very long or too complex. They had to be loops. But because they were going to loop a lot and you were going to listen to them a lot as you played, they had better be fucking catchy. and mission accomplished on that here. I love this soundtrack. This is one, I tend to listen to video game soundtracks while I work because they are evocative without being distracting. And so this one and Final Fantasy VI are always at the top of the list, and they're always at the top of lists of best soundtracks in games because, as you said, these two composers are just the best. They are the John Williamses of this world, of this medium. And the one thing that sets this apart, I think, Final Fantasy VI does this to a degree. There's like different flavors of musical stuff in there, although it tends to be a little more of a piece. Although the different tracks, they're a little more, I won't say they're more cohesive, but it's like they all fit in the same world because it all takes place in the same world in the same time period. So, you know, the way it would be like jarring to hear like heavy metal in the middle of Lord of the Rings, right? Like it all goes. Here you're hopping across time. And so that frees them up to do all kinds of like really different stuff in the soundtrack. So while it does cohere, but like the, like, you know, more African sounds of, say, the caveman era, where you get a lot of like drums and flutes and things that you would associate with something like that or that environment, are 100% different than these kind of sad digital sounds of the future, or or the Renaissance stuff you get when you're 400 years in the past, right? Everything kind of matches the era and just dramatically increases the variety of what you hear.
Yeah, I mean, and also, like, Nobuo Uematsu, if you've been playing any Final Fantasy game, you know that name. He's worked on, if not every Final Fantasy, most of them, and has touched the ones he hasn't worked on.
The good
like,
ones.
done a song. Right. But, like, I don't want to skip over the other composer on the soundtrack because...
well, he did the bulk of the work.
Right. So Yasunori Mitsuda did most of the work on this game, and Nobuo Uematsu did a few tracks from this game. But like also some of the other games that he's done are games that like you absolutely know for their music. Xenogears, another game from the PlayStation era, he did the soundtrack for that. Mega Man Legends 2, he did arrangements for. Bomberman 64, he did a ton of music for. The Xenosaga games. Like, this is a man who has his hands in a ton of other incredible games that you might have not even known. He was part of Tobal #1 with a ton of other composers, like, and still continues to work to this day, and like has done some incredible stuff. I mean, he is actually one of the composers. One of the reasons people are so excited for Sea of Stars, other than it is a game made by the folks who made The Messenger, Sabotage Game Studios, and they are an indie dev who are trying to make a Chrono Trigger-like game. Like, that was from the beginning. This game that's coming out in August of when we're recording is meant to be like Chrono Trigger. Well, they got the lead composer of Chrono Trigger to also work with Eric Brown on that game. Like, it's just there's a music footprint here that I couldn't even begin to like trace all the way back. Is just so incredibly done, and you hear his work in these other works if you are a fan of these other games as well, without a doubt.
Yeah, if you go to one of these things where they're going to do, hey, we're going to have our orchestra do video game music in concert, I think more often than not you would hear the main theme of Chrono Trigger performed. But do you have a track that's your favorite?
I mean, I hinted at this earlier, but it's hard to pick one over Magus's theme as a favorite. A, because it's a tone piece. When you arrive to the battle, like the fires light up the path and this music kind of swells. There's a blow of wind within the orchestration of like the music writing of the sound of the song. And something I didn't realize till I was much older is that the song is actually a very danceable bossa nova beat. Like, I had listened to not a lot of bossa nova, admittedly, when I was a kid, but like as an adult now, I've heard a lot of it. And like listening to it now, it's got this kind of flamenco or bossa nova kind of feel, which I know are two very different types of music, but like this definitely very inspired thing that is not even of possibly Japanese origin, but just because this is a medieval time period, pulling these other elements. And it's one of the most impressive boss songs because I think it tells the story of the boss fight in the way a lot of other Final Fantasy boss tracks, which I love, and battle music that I love, don't really tell the same kind of narrative. Like this song is the story of the fight with Magus and is composed in a way that is designed to run with the narrative. And while it can repeat in the later parts, it does loop on itself. It goes from like a verse to chorus kind of almost sound that like is meant to be a part of the narrative of this moment when you're fighting him.
It's a great track. No, I'm not going to argue with you at all. It's wonderful. I think for me, because I'm a sucker for like Renaissance kind of music, I love just the world map music. The very first trip you take 400 years into the past, when all of a sudden the world is gone from sort of the way it normally looks to this like kind of cool colors and misty green forest, and this music starts up that's like, oh, this is different. It's more minor key. It's it kind of creeps up on you. So I love that one. And then the music for the trial as well. When you get back, it's another just like, what an interesting flavor of a song to put into a game. Like it's kind of quirky and like sort of mischievous sounding music for the trial that lets you know that like, I think I'm getting railroaded in this trial. This is not going to go well no matter what I do. So those are highlights for me in terms of the soundtrack. But I mean, like I said, I'll put this on and listen to it all the time because it's just so good. It's just every time, it's like listening to that soundtrack takes you on the journey through time that the game does.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that while lots of great soundtracks give you a narrative, like from the movie standpoint, I always talk about how I love the Scott Pilgrim soundtrack because I can listen to that soundtrack from start to finish and know what scene each song is from because of how tied musically, and that's an Edgar Wright thing. And like same thing with certain games. Like there are certain games where I know exactly where I am, either because it's stage-based and each stage is super memorable, like the David Wise soundtrack for Donkey Kong Country, which I cited earlier, or a game like this where because the music is so important to the narrative and threaded through it, you know exactly what's going on as you're listening to the soundtrack.
Well, we're coming up on time, unfortunately, but I do want to ask you the question I always ask all our guests is, why do you think this thing is endured? As I said, it's always in the top 20%, if not higher, of any list of rankings of games, right? It's always way up there. What do you think it is that's made this thing endure and inspire things like the upcoming Sea of Stars? What is it about this thing?
I mean, I think at its core, it's just how impressive it is and how unlike it is anything else. From what I've played of Final Fantasy VI, I really like it. But the thing about Final Fantasy games is even though they're all different, at least I feel like what I've gleaned from the ones I've played, which is a lot of them, mostly the modern ones, is that they feel like Final Fantasy, right? Like you get a similar feel in every game for the most part. Some of them more than others. I'm currently playing through Final Fantasy 16, which a lot of people think isn't a Final Fantasy game because of how different the combat is, and I'm very inclined to disagree. I think it's the most Final Fantasy-ass Final Fantasy game I've played in a long time. But that's a whole other discussion. But I think what makes Chrono Trigger special is that there is no other game like this. Even Chrono Cross, which we teased a little bit, which is a sort of direct sequel to this game. It's complicated. Still time travel, sort of. Kinda. It doesn't feel like Chrono Trigger. A big thing that turned me off to Chrono Cross is that it didn't feel like Chrono Trigger, and I was disappointed with it when I first played it. I've yet to play the re-release. I want to give it another chance as an adult, but as a kid, I was very upset with it because it was like, this isn't Chrono Trigger. Because Chrono Trigger is such a unique game, not just narratively, like we've talked about at length, musically, character-wise, but it does things that the RPG genre has dabbled in for other games. And I've not played every RPG, and so there may be other RPGs that have done some of the things that Chrono Trigger has, but I think it had so many unique things, from the time travel to the double and triple text to killing the main character, having an optional seventh character in your party. All of these things had not been really done before much, if at all, at this point. And I think because of that, it endures. I can't even think of that many games now that kill the main character. There are some. I may have mentioned some of those games earlier in this episode, but like for the most part, this game does stuff that I don't think any other RPG has come close to accomplishing, at least not with the same amount of skill. Is it a perfect game? No, I don't. I think it's one of the most perfect RPGs ever made, but could there be things that people don't like about it? Sure, especially if you're a modern video game player. Like it feels its age as far as it looks like a Super Nintendo game, but I think control-wise, gameplay-wise, challenge-wise, content-wise, anyone who's playing RPGs now will find their favorite RPGs in this game, because I think what we've had in modern RPG creation all stems back to, for me, I would think Chrono Trigger. Again, I haven't played all of 6. You could probably point to 6 as well, but for sure Chrono Trigger. I think Chrono Trigger is what got us to some of the places we've been now with so many other games of its kind.
Yeah, based on what you've told me about why you love this game, I am 100% confident that if you play 6 all the way through to the end, you're going to love it, because of the narrative swings that thing takes. And the way it does it is very unique and special. It's why I think there's always been a little bit of a debate of like, which one's better, that one or this one? It's a stupid debate. Just go have fun with both. But this one, what I love about it is RPGs, these turn-based RPGs, in terms of their gameplay, are ultimately fairly simple. They can feel repetitive at times or rote, especially when you're just kind of churning through like basic enemies and things like that. So where they really live and die are kind of on the aesthetics and the story. Because it's sort of like having, like, do you have a really good DM for this quest or not? And the Dungeon Master for Chrono Trigger is wonderful. And it's really, really good at surprising you over and over again. Every time you get to go to a new time period, it's like, oh, cool. A new thing has opened up to me, right? And every time they kind of keep unfolding the game as you go. Now you can go to this time period. Now you have a new tool that lets you travel between time periods. Now you have more characters to combine in different ways. Oh, now you actually have more paths in the plot to choose from. And while they're doing it, they're hitting you with, these beautiful visuals, this beautiful music, and these extremely charming main characters. And there's something about that makes it feel really just alive, even all these years later. And, I could see, someone much younger than us, I would love for this to come out and for my daughter to be old enough to play it and see how she reacts to it. She got a taste of the Final Fantasy VI remaster, but she's only 7. She's a little young for it. I can't wait to see how younger people react to this when they play it, because I think it holds up like a champ. I think for all the reasons you said, right? It's special. There's nothing quite like it. And so many games have tried to imitate it and have never duplicated it. So, yeah.
I mean, I agree with all of that. And I think, like, just to say to your listener, if you've gotten this far, and spoilers be damned, you still want to play this game, the easiest way to play it is on Steam. I will say that the definitive way to play it is on the DS, because it took... So when the Super Nintendo, when the PlayStation version came out, they added a bunch of stuff that was created for the game but never finished. Ozzy's Castle and some other side missions that just didn't make it on the final cartridge that I think are actually very worthwhile and worth playing. And so I think that you should play that version, the DS version, because it has that stuff. The Steam version has it all as well. If you've only got the Super Nintendo version, that version absolutely holds up. It didn't need any of the extra stuff. The extra stuff is great, but it definitely didn't need it. I would say the worst version is the PlayStation 1 version, but if that's the only version you got, again, some Chrono Trigger is better than no Chrono Trigger, and then the mobile port is fine. It's not great, but it is a way to play the game, and all of the game is there.
Yeah, and it's functional, right? So if the easiest thing for you to do is just go onto the App Store and download it, go for it. You'll still have a great time with it. It's slightly a little clumsier to use, but not very. You'll pick it up quick. So Matt, like I said, we're almost out of time here, but tell our audience where they can find your good works.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for having me. This has been a delight. I've been wanting to come on for a while. I've been a listener since we got connected on Twitter.
Oh, awesome.
Way back before my Twitter got suspended. Turns out, if you call out TERFs on a platform filled with a ton of TERFs and terrible people, you get banned forever.
Yep.
So you can't find me on my personal Twitter anymore, but you can find me on the Fun and Games Twitter, Fun and Games Pod, which is where I've put most of my ship posting. If you happen to be on BlueSky, I'm DJ Stormageddon there. But otherwise, the best place to find everything that I do is at djstormageddon.com. It has all three of my podcasts, Fun and Games, which is a games discussion podcast with me and my co-host Jeff talk about the positive side of games. We have different topics. We have different guests. We have interviewed folks within the games industry, indie developers, composers, all sorts of really cool folks. It's worth a listen. There's a short form series within that feed as well called Side Quests, where a different host talks about a game they love and why they love it. It might be pertinent for you to listen to that series soon, as a certain familiar voice may be appearing there shortly, which is exciting.
It might even be the same week, I think, if I've done my math right. These two episodes might come out the same week.
It might, yeah. And so definitely check that out. I also do another video game podcast called Reignite. It started as a Mass Effect replay podcast with my incredible co-host Frankie Bradley, and we got through all 4 Mass Effect games. I played Andromeda for the first time on the series, which was really cool. I ended up really loving it, flaws and all. And now we've moved on to the Dragon Age franchise and have grown to a BioWare podcast. And I'm sure once we finish all the BioWare games, we'll go elsewhere. But it's about playing games and making choices based on how you feel in the moment, as if you were the character. And so it's always narrative-driven games. And sometimes we think about the meta and get outside of that. But for the most part, we try and play honestly to who we are as people, which has been a lot of fun. And then the last podcast that I host is Screen Snark, which I do with the incredible Rachel Quirky Shank. And it is a comedy podcast where we talk about the most recent things we've watched, me, my co-host, and then our guest. And then we interview the guest. And it's mostly goofs and excuses to make fart jokes. So definitely a worthwhile and fun listen. And then I'm the audio editor for the Game Informer show, which is just pretty neat as someone who grew up reading Game Informer. So that's a fun thing to do. And then I do other stuff. I don't know. That's a lot. I could be here all night telling your listeners all the things I've done. But yeah, definitely go to djstormageddon.com. That's the best place to find my merch, the Patreon for Fun and Games, which I will implore you to check out because that's how independent podcasts actually survive, and literally all the other things that I do.
Well, I will just fully endorse all of the different things you just mentioned because they are great. So please do go to seek out Matt's stuff. To do a little quick admin on our side, if you have thoughts on Chrono Trigger or our other recent episodes, which include, let's see, we just did Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Before that was Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and a few others. I think next up in the batting order is My Cousin Vinny. We may be doing a Roger Rabbit episode soon. We've got, what else is on the docket? Muppet Treasure Island is now on the docket, which is cool.
Nice.
I've never seen it, so I'm looking forward to that. And a few other things as well are all in the works. So if you have thoughts on all of those things, you can tweet it because for now we haven't decided what lifeboat to go to after Twitter. So we're still on Twitter as at NostalgiumPod until it is... the evil is purged or we find a new place to go. We're also on Instagram, and I would encourage you to follow us there because that's where I post all the bonus stuff for the show, just little reels and things to kind of add a little extra stuff to each episode. So look for us there. And if you have time, of course, tell a friend, drop us a review. All of that stuff is really helpful. Matt, thanks again for doing this, man. What a great game to go and revisit.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And yes, rate and review this podcast, my podcast, every podcast you listen to. You can do it on Spotify. You can do it on Apple. I think you can do it on Google now. Literally, it's the thing that helps podcasters the most. So if you have a library of podcasts like I do, go review all of them. It will take you an hour at most to do all of them, unless you have as many podcasts as I do, and it helps us all out.
And it costs you nothing. So
it does cost you nothing.
Yeah. So thanks again, Matt. And until next time, that is one more entry in the Nostalgium Arcana.
We must brave the frigid winds and vicious monsters of Death Peak. Only then can we revive Chrono, our dear leader who fell in battle.
Seems like a lot of work, huh?
It's really cold here.
Yes, but surely we're willing to do anything to save Chrono, right?
Real windy, too.
Am I the only one that thinks this isn't worth it?
Yeah, I mean,
totally not worth it, man.
Surely, you jape.
The guy never said a word, Frog.
I forgot he was around half the time.
But He was our leader!
Oh, yeah, great leader. What was it he was always saying to us? Oh, right, nothing.
Honestly, as a main character, he was pretty overrated.
Where's the motivation? What's the backstory?
Calculated value of this side quest. Not worth freezing her asses off.
This is treasonous! If there's even the slightest chance we can bring Chrono back, we have to take it!
Wow, that was actually really inspiring.
What? Really?
Honestly, I got chills.
All in favor of Frog being the new leader and leaving Chrono dead? Aye.
I suppose I would be a noble leader.
That's the spirit.
Oh, let's get out of here. My nipples could cast ice too.